Just us.
Okay, and then who do you have to your left, just so we know who's here?
Air and Radiation Director, Chris Hoagland.
Okay, Chris, welcome. And so with that, the floor is yours, Madam Secretary, to present whatever you want to present to us.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan. There you are. Hello again. And members of the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. For the record, I am Serena McElwain, Secretary of Maryland's Department of the Environment. And again, joining me here from MDE is the Air and Radiation Director, Chris Hoagland. And he's going to be advancing the slides for me. So thank you for inviting me so that I can provide this briefing on the climate pollution reduction plan that was released just last month. We were required to prepare that plan as in accordance with the Climate Solutions Now Act, which required that MDE create a plan that ensures that we are meeting the climate change goals that are outlined in the Climate Solutions Now Act. So I want to start by saying I am really proud that Maryland's Climate Solutions Now Act set the strongest greenhouse gas reduction goals in any state in the country. In Maryland, we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by the 60% that's outlined in the Climate Solutions Now Act by 2031, and we will meet net zero reductions by 2045. The good news I have to share is that achieving our climate goals will be great for not just the environment, but also for our economy. Our plan details how Marylanders will enjoy shared economic benefits as we start making that shift toward a clean economy. So before I get into the details of the plan, I do want to highlight that we have made extraordinary progress toward those goals already. We have strong momentum on our side, so that we can continue to accelerate progress as we have been before. Maryland used to, and this is a good point and a very important point I want to make. Maryland, we used to be have the worst air quality in the eastern United States. Our energy system back then was heavily reliant on coal, and the air across the state and in our cities was too often unhealthy to even breathe. But thanks to decades of hard work, leadership, and strong policy last year, and this is really important for me to say, last year, we celebrated a huge milestone in Maryland. We demonstrated that Maryland was meeting all of the national ambient air quality standards for the first time since the passage of the Federal Clean Air Act in 1970. This is a huge accomplishment, excuse me, that has fundamentally improved air quality of life here in Maryland. And our work, yes, it's far from complete, and we must secure environmental justice in communities that have been historically left behind. So we're not finished, we have more to do, but it's still an opportunity for us today to reflect on all the good work and the good progress that we've made and learn from the actions that got us here this far. Our greatest progress so far and our great progress so far and strong set current policies really do get us to just about 51% reduction in 2031. And what I mean by that, and you can look on this chart that we have in front of us today, if we continued with the current policies that we have in place and we implement the planned policies that we're supposed to implement going forward, we would reach 51% greenhouse gas reductions by 2031. And you can see that on the left side of the graph, but we need to do better than 60%. And this is why we have the climate plan that we're talking about today. The plan lays out steps that we need to take so that we can go from meeting 51%, which is not what we're supposed to meet. We have to meet 60% as called for in the Climate Solutions Now Act. So now I just want to provide a few highlights on those steps. And I'm going to go through three major sectors of our economy, and I want to start with electricity. Decarbonizing our electric sector is really the key to unlocking progress everywhere else, because plentiful, clean electricity can fuel not only zero emission vehicles, but also buildings. We have seen our most rapid progress so far from the electricity sector as we have moved away from coal. So we do have strong policy momentum, as I said earlier, and we have it because we also have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We have the Renewable Portfolio Standard and offshore wind that's all already leading the way. So this plan puts forward new policy mechanisms so we can really start building on the momentum that we have and move us forward so that we can meet Governor Moore's goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035. This progress on clean electricity, it enables us to get, excuse me, get the climate benefits from shifting from electric buildings and vehicles. Shifting to electric vehicles and buildings. The good news is that this transition is already underway and accelerating. Heat pumps, a lot of people don't know this, but heat pumps, they now outsell gas furnaces in the United States already. The best-selling car in the country last year was an electric car. Don't ask me what kind, I don't know. I have a hint, it's probably a Tesla, but anyway, but also not just the best-selling car in the country, but electric cars are actually the best-selling car in the world. And these new electric systems are increasingly powered by clean electricity. So there's been a lot of focus and conversation about the capabilities of our electric grid and if it can handle the transition to clean electricity. The Public Service Commission completed their study of the demands that our clean energy transition will have or will place on the grid, and it concluded that the growth in electricity use will be manageable in the future and below the levels that we've successfully already managed in the past. So next, I want to talk about the transportation sector. Oh, there we go. Okay, transportation decarbonization is the largest part of the plan. 40% of the climate pollution in Maryland comes from transportation. We have to look critically and seriously at this sector, which is why we have big policies in the plan that you'll see related to transportation. This is where we have to be more aggressive. With Governor Moore's leadership and direction from the General Assembly, MDE took two huge steps last year to accelerate our shift to clean, efficient, money-saving electric vehicle. We adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program to move our light-duty cells to 100% electricity by 2035. We also adopted the Advanced Clean Trucks program so that we can start replacing our largest and dirtiest diesel engines with new electric trucks. Those electric trucks will have real outsized benefits for the communities that are really overburdened by air pollution, because heavy diesel traffic is the largest source of air quality problems to too many Maryland communities. Equally important is continued investment in and expansion of public transportation options for Marylanders. Our partners at the Maryland Department of Transportation, they have set ambitious goals for reducing single passenger vehicle use, and they're moving on long-term investments in new public transportation projects like the Baltimore Red Line. And all of that plays a critical part in the transportation decarbonization initiative that we have, and that is how we are going to meet our goals. I just talked about the transportation. Did it work? Okay, our slides are a little behind, but that's all right, we'll get there. Okay, I just talked about the transportation decarbonization. So how do we do that? We have to have a strong charging network. And Maryland is doing well. And a lot of people don't realize that. because I hear a lot about we don't have enough chargers, we don't have the infrastructure. But I want to say today, we are doing really well in that area. We have thousands of chargers, roughly one charger for every 18 vehicles. That ratio is good. And we're building the network to address concerns that we continue to hear about charging availability. So we're going to do even more and get even better. We're investing tens of millions of dollars into strengthening and growing that network through the federally funded and state funded programs at MDOT and the Maryland Energy Administration as well, the Maryland Clean Energy Center, as well as us at MDE. The third sector I'd like to talk about is buildings. Buildings are a key part also of this transition. It is so critical to electrify and decarbonize buildings for the goals because most of our energy use is in our buildings. So we're putting the building energy performance standards in place right now. They're really important to electrifying our large buildings. We have to find funding, we know that, to help buildings with this transition. They can't do it alone. And we know that, and we're working hard to figure out ways to do that. New policies like equipment standards and clean heat standards will add to that and move all of our buildings to clean energy. So those policies in the end are all about making investments in our homes and in our businesses. Those investments are a pathway to work, wealth, wages, because that work needs to be done right here in Maryland, and that's how we move to a clean and green economy. Our plan as a whole will create an additional 27,000 jobs between now and 2031. And this is not just about, and I said that before, but it's not just about environmental protection. It's about building a stronger economy in Maryland. There's no either or, it's both. Everything we do, we have in mind climate change and our economy. Some great news here is that the clean energy transition we're building through this plan is really great for family budgets. So when we move to clean electric homes and cars, we save thousands of dollars for the average Maryland household. We have support from the federal government to do this. The Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, expanded tax credits for Americans to cover the upfront cost of those money-saving investments in cleaner and more efficient homes and cars. And the state is also expanding our programs in this area. The Maryland Energy Administration is rolling out rebates for electrification projects and households later on this year, and they have $137 million from federal funds that they're going to be using. So despite all of these resources from the federal sector and the federal law, we really do need to have a conversation about how do we fund this transition over the long term here in Maryland, because we all know this, but those federal funds are not going to last long. And that's where Maryland needs to kick in and be ready to continue the transition. This long-term need accelerating our investment by about $1 billion per year. We identified several ideas and concepts to consider in the climate plan that draw upon different funding sources that does not impact the taxpayer. That's the key. We want to do this without raising taxes on Marylanders. So this is not going to be easy, but these are just some concepts that we put into the plan that can start the conversation. Governor Moore takes this very seriously, and this is why his budget finds an additional $90 million to start investing right away. Despite the challenges that we have with the budget, that's a demonstration of commitment and how serious the governor is about this transition. We know that fighting climate change goes hand in hand with economic development. So we have to consider a variety of options to move where we can, and we're already well on our way. So for example, I just want to give a few examples that we're pursuing from federal grants. And these three alone are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We have the EPA Clean School Bus Grants. We have EPA Solar for All grants, and we have EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Implementation grants. So federal grants and loans. Yeah, again, that's not enough. We need to rely on Maryland. Next slide, new investments. Okay, once we have the new funding sources, we can extend and supplement federally funded programs to drive investment in efficient electric buildings, electric vehicles and chargers, clean industry and workforce development, among other priorities that we've talked about. So I'd like to close with a few reminders of why we're doing all of this. And I am just about done. When we reduce carbon pollution, we also reduce other forms of air pollution that cause public health problems here in Maryland today. The clean economy transition in this plan will yield huge benefits to Marylanders from improved air quality and public health, with those benefits concentrated, as they should be, in historically disadvantaged communities. I've said several times now that this is good for the economy. I'm not just making this up. I'm not making up those numbers. Our scientists and economists they took a detailed look at what we're talking about today, and they prepared specific estimates of the economic impact for this plan. In addition to those, to the thousands of jobs that I mentioned, this transition will make Marylanders and our economy more prosperous to the tune of billions of dollars. So we cannot lose sight of the original purpose for all of this. So we have to respond to climate change. It is serious. It's a global challenge. It's here. It's in front of us today. Next slide. Now that the plan is out, we're getting to work. We're moving to leave no federal dollars behind, and we're moving on regulatory processes to get new programs in place. We're coordinating with the Maryland Commission on Climate Change so that we can design and implement new approaches, and we're evaluating with all of you new funding sources. Thank you, and that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. We've got questions for the secretary. Why don't we, let's start with Vice Chair Kagan, then we're gonna go to Senator Gallion next, and then we'll take it around the horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, always great to see you and hear all the good things that you and the Moore Miller administration are working on. So thank you for that. A lot of good news in here and a lot of work in progress. I had a really granular, specific question, and I don't know whether you'll know this, but on page 15, when you talk about electrification creates local jobs, electricians and heat pump installers will benefit, which I totally understand. Do we have enough of those trained people who are licensed, who will be ready when and if the demand spikes, so that supply and demand, so it doesn't end up being too expensive, people don't have long delays, give up on the fact that they want to get green technology, but they couldn't get someone to install it in time, and their hot water wasn't working, or their heat pump wasn't working, all that. So can you just talk about whether we've got the personnel trained and ready and licensed?
That is a really good question. And I did speak earlier about workforce development.
Yes.
So that's a part of the plan. We have to make sure we have the right people in the right place to do the jobs. And so that is a part of the transition. So we will, and that was part of the reason we have in the $1 billion. Some of that is really toward workforce development and making sure we have the trained and skilled professionals to do what we need to do. Are we there yet? Do we have enough to answer your question? I don't know the answer to that particularly, but I can get you that answer, and maybe you have more than that. Is that okay? Great. I couldn't say today, yes, we have plenty of electricians,
and
but we certainly are making sure that we're planning for it.
perfect. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're gonna go to Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Madam Secretary.
See you.
I have a few specific questions about the EV vehicle sales mandates. If you could shed some light for me. It's my understanding that beginning in model year 27, which would actually be the fall of 26, that 43% of all vehicles shipped by a manufacturer to its Maryland dealers must be EVs. Every year after that, it goes up until it gets to 100% by like 2035. So does that 43% standard apply to each of the manufacturers individually, or is it as a group?
I'll let you, go ahead.
Sure. So in those
You want me to-
regulations,
Just, yeah, put the mic up.
thanks, sorry about that. So the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations are the regulations in question. They include a number of flexibilities for manufacturers, so they can actually deploy less than that amount in model year 2027 if they take advantage of some of the regulatory flexibilities. It does apply individually to the manufacturers, but they can trade among one another the credits, so that it's the industry as a whole that has to achieve that. If individual manufacturers are behind, they can purchase credits from individual manufacturers who are ahead.
Okay, so if a manufacturer cannot meet that 43% standard, I've had some dealers have raised concerns that the total number of EVs shipped to Maryland dealers could be lessened. If that happens, Maryland dealers could face a shortage of vehicles to sell. Have you looked into that? Do you agree that that's a possible outcome, at least in the short term, that with these regulations, they could be running up against that issue?
So we are achieving the sales growth we need to be on track, we believe, to achieve those future standards. We've been achieving about 50% year over year sales growth from electric vehicles. Those standards are an extension of our current standards, where all of the manufacturers are over complying healthily and building up additional credits from the current over compliance that they can use once the new program is in place, as one of the flexibilities I mentioned, to ease into the new standards if they need a slower ramp up. So we're confident in the department that our EV sales growth is on track to achieve these goals. And that there are ample flexibilities built into that regulation for individual manufacturers to be able to comply.
Okay, and then I've heard of these financial penalties that could be imposed on the manufacturers. You talked a little bit about flexibility, is one of the words that you used. Does MDE have the flexibility to adjust those financial penalties that would be imposed on manufacturers that fail to meet that 43% mark?
Yes, the department has broad enforcement discretion for this regulation and other regulations. We do not have set penalty rates for this regulation.
Okay. Next question is to deal with hybrid vehicles.
Mhm.
So what I've also heard, a lot of folks like the idea of, hey, we can plug in, but then also with the hybrid, we know if we have a longer trip, whatever, we can use that hybrid. My understanding is, if you're, I guess the way California does it, the hybrid only counts as like 1/5 of an EV. So to get that full credit, I'm just wondering where we are with that, and if there's a way that we can put them on par, since, I think consumers might be more inclined to purchase a hybrid at this point. So where are we with that?
So plug-in hybrids do play a role in the future regulation. Up to 20% of the vehicles delivered can be hybrids to achieve the goal. So on an individual basis, it isn't necessarily that one counts for 20%, but when a manufacturer is demonstrating they hit this much in any particular year, 20% of that can come from plug-in hybrids. I have a plug-in hybrid. I agree with you. They're very convenient and they're an effective way to get around. And so they have a role in the new program.
So is there flexibility if Maryland wanted to change that they could?
No, with these multi-state standards, we have to be consistent with all of
Yeah.
the other states under requirements by the Clean Air Act.
Okay, and then one last one on that. Climate change report suggests, $300 million in state funds would be needed annually to incentivize Marylanders to purchase the EVs.
Mhm.
It looks like there's like 8.25 million maybe in this budget. So we're way below that 300 million mark. So we're at 290
Yeah.
million shortfall.
Yes.
How do we square that gap?
Yeah, that's the problem. That's where when you see in the plan, we have an estimate of how much money it will take for the green transition. Some of that, as part of that $1 billion, we could use a lot of that money to help offset exactly what you're talking about. The fact is, with $8.2 million, that's all we have right now. That money runs out after 2 months. So there's not enough money left to really help with the transition. So we need to do all that we can to figure out a way, funding mechanism going forward, working with all of you to see how we can get that number up so we can incentivize people to buy more electric vehicles. Did you want to say something? It's not enough.
Okay, I just have concerns with, we hear about these ongoing budget issues years out. And we're told you're gonna need 300 million. There's only 8 point something million budgeted. So that's a huge gap when we're looking at these deficits coming up, but
Well,
thank you.
it was, can I just say something? Just to
Sure.
give you an example, in other states, and I'll just mention California, that budget is, was it 1 billion?
I think that was over about 10 years. We got to $1 billion.
Yeah, they got to about $1 billion, and it's really necessary to have enough money to incentivize people to move forward and get the EVs. They're not going to do it without the funding. So it's really important that we look at that. It's 300 million is a lot, but when you think of how much other states are spending, how much investments are put aside for it, and then when you see the result of when you push that kind of money into the economy, it makes a huge difference. Right now, we have about 88,000 EVs on the road versus 5 million gas cars. So we have a long way to go. I'll end it at that.
Okay, we're gonna go to Senator Lewis Young. We'll go around the horn across to Senator Brooks next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for that presentation. I have two questions. You did make a reference to the renewable energy portfolio, and I'm curious to know if you have a position on removing waste incinerators from tier 1 of that portfolio. And if so, if you have calculated or thought about the potential for investing what is now going towards waste incinerators towards cleaner energy programs. So that's my first question. And then I have a more regional question, which is water and air don't recognize state boundaries, and some of our neighbors do not have the goals we have. So how do you mitigate that in reaching our goals? Thanks.
Okay, regarding the incinerators, I'm gonna let you talk about that. But we did include that in the report. We talked about incinerators as part of the plan. We didn't go into real details because we need to have more conversations about exactly what that means. Do you want to add anything on that?
I think that covers it.
Okay. Your last question was can you restate that for me?
So water and air
Yep.
don't recognize state boundaries, right? So most of our neighbors, our geographic neighbors, don't have the aggressive goals that we have in Maryland. So
yeah.
how does that affect our goals, and what, if anything, can we do to mitigate the effect of our
I see.
neighbors?
I see. It does impact what we're trying to do. The US EPA recently pushed out a new rule called the Good Neighbors rule. And that's where they're looking at holding the states accountable, like Pennsylvania, for the pollution that we're getting in Maryland. And you're right, water travels, air travels. And so it really does impact what we're trying to do. We saw that with the air that traveled over here from Canada without a passport and polluted the entire Maryland,
Good point.
right?
point.
So we need to make sure that we are working closely with other states, and we are doing that. And we plan to continue to collaborate with them. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna go over to Senator Brooks and then we'll come down the line from there. Senator Brooks?
All right, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Madam Secretary, for the
Hi.
presentation.
Mhm.
On page 3, you're talking about the Maryland had some of the worst air quality,
Yes.
and now we've got some of cleaner air quality. And I know the goals we're trying to get there with clean energy. Yeah. Right now, the clean energy sources would be wind, solar, hydro, geothermal.
Mhm.
And there's one other component there. And when you talked about it, you didn't mention it, but is nuclear a part of that equation for clean energy?
Well, nuclear is a part of it today. It's 40% of our energy today. So it is a part of it. Yes.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
good, yeah, because we know that the first two I mentioned, they're not base load, we
Mhm.
just don't have the capacity yet, so just wanted to make sure that is a part of the equation. It will remain a part of the equation.
No, that's a good point.
Yes.
As we transition, we have to make sure we're ready. I think
Yes.
that's where you're going, the transition itself. Right now, today, we don't have enough renewable energy to shut off anything.
Right.
We have to plan for that. We have to work with industry. We have to really keep modeling out what it will take in order to get renewables at the scale that we need to make the overall 100% transition. That will take a lot of time and a lot of money,
Okay,
but
thank you.
we're doing it. We're going to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Carozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to quickly touch on, follow up my colleague on EVs, as well as ask about the heating and water equipment, zero emission standards, and then a quick question on offshore wind. I wanted, Madam Secretary, to point out that I represent a border district, literally in Salisbury, which is quite the hub for auto dealers in my district and a major employer. Literally, you can be 5 minutes into Delaware and maybe 20 minutes at most into Virginia.
Mhm.
Pohanka, which has 8 auto dealerships, and again, a major employer in Salisbury, recently invited the members of the Eastern Shore delegation to come on site to kind of better understand the challenges they're having with the EV mandates. And it was a startling for some of us to understand, number one, some of the safety issues that the employees would be dealing with the EV batteries. They were actually in kind of I call them the astronaut suits for protection and how they actually work on these. Plus, it was brought to our attention that, and this is where I'm asking the Maryland Department of the Environment, that has there been a thorough evaluation of the environmental impact of battery materials, and concerned about the concerned about the disposal of them as well as the handling of them. My understanding is that if you extract 500 pounds of raw minerals in every battery, there's still 500 pounds of steel and plastic that need to be disposed of. So kind of what's the plan there? The average battery has a lifespan of 5 to 7 years. What happens to these batteries, after their full use? The concern that right now the EV market is only 7%, and it does not, the consumer demand is not there locally, and it looks like the government policies are driving that. So I guess my immediate question is, have you looked at the environmental impacts as well as the safety with the batteries also being a fire hazard? Has that thoroughly been evaluated, and are there reports to guarantee, like there's a guaranteed plan on disposal and a guaranteed plan on the safety when my constituents are working with these batteries?
I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris, because I know you've been working on issues like that. So why don't you answer that one?
Sure thing. There are, of course, environmental impacts from the manufacturing of electric vehicle batteries, in addition to all the components that EVs share with gas vehicles. And this is a relatively well-studied topic where An electric vehicle, when it's built, has sort of that higher upfront environmental cost, but then it pays that down compared to a gas vehicle as it drives and avoids gasoline use. So electric vehicles on balance are substantially less environmentally problematic than gasoline vehicles, even accounting for those upfront costs. And since they're relatively a relatively new technology, most electric vehicles on the road are new. They haven't entered the disposal system yet. It will take a while for the waste stream of batteries to grow, but initial results from the infrastructure in place show that the batteries are quite recyclable. Right, they're achieving very high 90% material recovery yields from lithium ion battery recycling. So the technology is promising, and as the vehicles grow in their share and the waste stream becomes sort of a material amount, the good news is that we have technologies available to effectively recycle those materials.
My concern is we have a plan here that kind of assumes that there will be consumer demand for the EVs. In my district, there have been cases where people bought the EVs in good faith, and now have returned some of them because it simply didn't work for them. The charging system simply wasn't in place. That if it takes almost an hour, and that's taking the battery to 80%, and you don't charge after 80% because it's going to destroy the battery. Most of my constituents don't have that kind of time. And when they do, they sometimes go and there's either lines that they would have to wait, which would take even more time, or some of the systems they thought were in place that the infrastructure simply wasn't there. So
Yeah.
It seems to me if we're kind of if we're depending on the consumer demand, it's not there in my district. I want to go back to the safety issue though. You may or may not be aware that insurance companies won't allow dealers and service centers to store the batteries inside the buildings due to fire hazards. And also that they can't be extinguished once they are burning. Also concerning, because I represent Maryland's coast, these batteries do not fare well with salt water and, appear to be causing a problem for those of us living in coastal areas. I just think that the safety and the impact of the disposal issue truly have to be thoroughly thought out, especially when I'm hearing that there's really not a plan at this point. So I'm getting on the record to put that out there. Is there anything else you would like to say about EVs before I move to my next question?
Well, some of the things you mentioned, we do hear. It's not perfect yet, but we do have a lot of people who have EVs. I have one myself. And, there are issues with, in terms of people are just not used to change. So with gas, you can go to a pump and pump your gas, and 3 minutes later or less than that, you're full and ready to go. The new technology with EVs is different. So it doesn't work for some right now, particularly in your area. You're talking about the coastal areas and also some of the concerns with batteries. But overall, this is the right move in terms of moving toward EVs. We're looking at everything that you stated already. We're not turning our back. We're not just pushing people to buy an EV without looking at the battery issues, the insurance issues. I've heard what you just mentioned about insurance issues, but I've also heard that some of the insurance premiums are going up for certain reasons. So I just want to make it clear that we're not turning our back on it. We hear you. I've heard it. We will look into it, and that will be a part of what we do as well, meaning making sure we're understanding and responding to those things.
That because you talked about the new jobs, and I'm very concerned about the current jobs and
Okay.
the safety of those employees in those jobs.
Okay.
I'm turning to the zero emission standard for heating and water equipment in buildings. I'm trying to understand that it seems to me that with this standard, that in the future you'd only be able to purchase zero emission units. And it looks to me then that this zero emission standard really is the banning of the sale of all natural gas furnaces and water heaters in the state.
I'm gonna let you talk about the building. Energy
Sure. So
standards.
these are standards under consideration in many states, and we're coordinating with other states on phasing this in multiple places. And it would again phase in toward zero emission technology for carbon dioxide, for NOx, for pollutants that cause air quality, for space heating and water heating equipment. Certainly, existing equipment would be unaffected. Repairs to existing equipment would always be acceptable. And it's a question of sort of when it phases in, how far into the future, and how gradual is that phase in.
Consideration in other states. Do any other states, have they actually adopted? You said under consideration, so I'm trying to understand if there's other states that have adopted these standards.
Some local jurisdictions have. I don't believe any other states have followed through an adoption yet. That's why we're working with other states before we adopt ourselves to get as much consistency as possible with our partner states.
And do we know about the cost?
Yes, we've analyzed that in detail in the plan. And so the cost of different heating technologies factored into all of the analysis in the plan. And in fact, they over the long term, these are technologies that tend to save money. Heat pumps already have roughly half of heating systems installed in Maryland in a given year are heat pumps already. They're already the predominant type of new heating system. So the technology is available, it's proven, it's cost effective. And the question is just how can we accelerate that to achieve our climate and clean air goals?
Okay, we're gonna go to Senator Hester next.
Thank you. It's always good to see you, Madam Secretary.
You
I have two questions. So I read through the report. Fantastic job. Congratulations to all of your staff, worked really hard on it. I was zeroing in on page 15, which said what the plan is and is not. And so just to summarize for the people who don't have it in front of them, the plan is not offered as a comprehensive strategy to make Maryland more resilient to climate change impacts. In the near term, Maryland's climate will continue to get warmer, wetter, and wilder, regardless of how the plan is implemented. Sea levels will continue to rise. Maryland's low-lying farms will be increasingly affected by saltwater intrusion, and islands throughout the Chesapeake Bay and much of Dorchester County will be lost to the sea by the end of the century. Other efforts, including Maryland's forthcoming next generation adaptation plan and state resilience strategy, will address how to climb out of the walls and of the hole to start crumbling. I don't know, something like that. So in 22, we passed a law that created our first chief resilience officer, and that position is within MDEM. They've recently hired a great person to work on that, and they've got more open positions below that person if anybody's looking to join a great team. And it required UMCs to produce an updated adaptation resilience strategy by January 1st of 2024, which was, this year. I know they're a bit behind. My question is, do you know, or can you find out when the state resilience strategy is coming? And if we're investing $90 million in climate greenhouse gas reductions, how much are we investing in resilience at the same time? Like I believe, and I think you believe, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but I'm only seeing one thing in the budget at the moment.
So I will look into that, as you ask. I don't know if you have any, okay, so resiliency is important and adaptation. So we're not ignoring one for the other. It might not be specifically laid out, how are we trying to be more resilient, but we do have stormwater mitigation. We do things like that to make sure that we are addressing the climate threat that's in front of us. And you're right, what you read on page 15, all those things, we're doing a lot of things and we're trying to get ahead of it and be more resilient to what's coming, because the earth, the world, we keep warming. But at the same time, I do agree with you that we have to do all of these things that we're doing to adapt and be more resilient. So I'll make sure I look into this resiliency strategy report that you mentioned, and I'll get back with you.
it's a budget issue. Like,
Yeah.
I just think, I mean, it might not be 50-50, but it's sure not 0 and 100, you know? And I'm not saying that it is, but if we could have an
Yeah.
analysis of like, because these plans were,
Right.
I think that we actually need to fund them to get them done and then set aside some money to start doing, more than we're currently doing. So that was my first question. My
Okay.
second question goes to page 9 of your presentation. Can the grid handle it? And so I'm really looking forward to it. I think we're gonna have a briefing on this next week, Chair? This week
On what?
on grid resiliency? Maybe not.
You know what? I'll have to get back to you. I
That's
don't have that
okay.
committed to memory.
So it's a topic that we've talked about and we continue to talk about. So I read this letter from a bunch of utilities, which says that they find some flaws in the PSC report. And you can't believe everything everybody says, but sometimes there's some truth in it. And so, when you're saying that the grid can handle it, it probably can with the appropriate investments.
Mhm.
Is there anything in the climate plan that aims to support the necessary grid investments that we have to make in order to do this electrification? Because I don't think that cost analysis is in that report. And so once again, like we want to move this way, but we got to do it in a balanced approach and make sure that the grid can handle it. And it can handle it, but there may be some caveats, like we have to do X, Y, or Z in order to make sure that it can handle it. And then my question is, who's paying for it? Is it the ratepayers? Is the state subsidizing anything? But like, I think all these pieces need to work together so that we've got a sustainable grid. We're doing enough on resilience and adaptation. And at the same time, we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, and that's why we need to work closely with PSC. They're the ones, so a lot of the things you just mentioned is in their area. But again, we're in partnership, we're in collaboration, and it is very important. And we do plan to continue to work with the PSC so that we can address those issues that you're referring to. Investments are really important when you think about. Yes, the grid, the study that came out of the PSC says the grid will be able to handle it. But yes, we do need to continue to make investments and continue to fund everything that we need to do to make sure we are ready. Chris, I don't know if you want to add something to that? Okay.
Maybe, I mean, I'd be happy to share with you the letter of concern
Yes.
that I received. And just to make sure that we're once again looking at how we're spending our money and making sure we're doing everything that needs to be done.
That's why I've said before, the funding of this green transition is big, is huge.
Absolutely.
We
and
have
need
to
do
look
it.
at everything, not just one thing. So yes, thank you for your comments. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. We're on the same page. Thank you so much, Madam
Yes,
Secretary.
of course.
And Sarah Hester, we do not yet have a resiliency briefing. We do have a critical areas briefing next week. We've got PFAS. We don't have the resiliency briefing on the books yet. So, Senator Washington.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Madam Secretary, so much for that distilling the report into this presentation was good work, and you didn't miss any of the points. I'm very happy that my colleague raised the issue around mitigation and adaptation and resilience. And I think that is a good follow-up to your observation that about what happened over the summer with the forests in Canada burning, and the fact that many of us probably for the first time in a year pulled out our masks that we had worn inside, and now we had to wear our masks, our K95 masks outside. So I think we do need to figure out and incorporate in the plan, how do we or what can we provide for our communities to be able to manage these change. So I'm just happy that was raised. So could you did it sort of quickly, but could you remind us what the climate threat is and what happens if we don't, in real terms, Maryland, if we don't do anything, if we don't decrease the amount of diesels on our roads, if we don't reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, just remind us exactly what will happen not 30 years, not 100 years, but what can happen in the next 10 years? Because I know some of those studies are out. So within our lifetime, let us know what could actually happen if we do nothing to begin to mitigate. Maryland,
Yeah.
but also the world, that we have to do it in together. But I can't think about the world, but we can think about what we can do at this point.
Right. So in a nutshell, so we are trying to, so with climate change, as I said before, it is really real. And what we're doing is trying to, you can't stop climate change because it's already started and it's a lot of damage that's already done to.
I guess that's what I wanted to, like,
Okay.
there's some dollar amount, and I know around water and like what flooding, I mean, there's some actual fiscal consequences that actually might be more than the investments that we're talking about. So if you could maybe speak to, he's shaking his head, he thinks so.
Oh, you want to address that? Go ahead. Please go for it.
Yeah, certainly. We could spend all day going through exactly all of the challenges from climate change, but you're right. These are billion-dollar problems easily, like the impact of more frequent and severe heat waves on public health, the impact of more frequent and severe rain events, the impacts of sea level rise and the saltwater intrusion and groundwater in the eastern shore that precedes that and is taking agricultural land out of production. The increase in potential communicable diseases with warmer and wetter climate. These are all, each of them individually, billion-dollar problems, and they add up to really substantial cost of inaction. So the cost of action is certainly less than the cost of inaction. And then there are all of these other cascading benefits from cleaner air and a more resilient economy.
I just want to have this conversation a little bit. The palpable ones, I think the ones that we can relate to is the impact of more communicable diseases on the health system, right? So we just went through understanding what happens if all of a sudden a large portion of our population is in need of hospital services. And we found that we don't have the capacity, right? So I guess if you don't have that analysis now, it would be interested to really know specifically on Maryland hospitals, what would be the cost and what would have to happen on the infrastructure and how many people would be needed. And then you spoke earlier about not just communicable diseases, because people can imagine, well, I'll just wear a mask all the time and I won't be around anyone and I won't get sick. So the heat, the impacts of the heat and what that does to bodies and to humans. I think that those would be really helpful for us to really make that calculation about how much it costs and is it worth it to spend $1 billion and to save lives, but
We'll
so that we
definitely
don't
look
spend
into
10.
that. But I will answer your question. Yes, it's worth spending $1 billion.
Yeah, I know you know.
Actually more than $1 billion, because it's going to cost more than that,
Right.
to continue to get ahead and make sure we are adapting and we're doing everything we can to address the climate change threat.
But again, understanding that, we're wanting to spend $1 billion in education, we need to spend $1 billion on our healthcare system. So it just really would be helpful to really, as much as possible for us to be very, very specific about our case in Maryland about what we're doing. So to that, outlined in the plan, you are recommending that we pass some legislation to implement some funding sources. Are there any that you think are more feasible or more the juice is worth the squeeze more than others, or?
I would say that all of them that we put in the plan are important. We have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative now. It's a cap and invest program. It's been successful. Right now, we're capping the power plant sector. We're bringing in $150 million per year. And we're using that money for the green transition. We're using it for solar projects. We're using it to help low-income families. And we're taking the money from RGGI, which is a greenhouse gas initiative I just mentioned. We are using that money instead of taxpayers' money to contribute to all that we're talking about today. So that works. That's one of the programs that we already have. We've had that for 15 years. So that one is a good program.
Others that were not included in the program that Sierra Club, for example, proposed, which is diverting some highway expansion money and fixing of roads and transit orient development. Have there been any conversations with that agency and or just contemplated, that recommendation? And it was absent from your presentation. So I wonder.
No, we
Thoughts
didn't
about
address,
that?
yeah, we didn't address that. I've heard of that before. I wouldn't want to comment on should we divert money from the roads? I mean, because the bottom line is we're still driving on the roads. And sometimes we get into that it's if or that or either. There's a win, there's a lose. In this game, what we're talking about today, it's impacting every single thing, and we can't pick one over the other. So highway expansion, all the things that, needs to be done with the highways is still important because we have to drive on them and they have to be safe. So that's my position on it.
Your very common sense response to that. And this is my last one. It does have to do, so last session, we passed the bill SB 843. Well, it was heard in session, sorry, it was heard last session about the fossil fuel industry as the primary industry responsible for climate change. And that the state of Maryland is paying billions of dollars right now to fund pollution mitigating efforts. Now, the Justice 40 talks about requiring that 40% of the funds go to communities disproportionately impacted. So this is this concept of making polluters pay. I didn't really see that as much in this plan, but given your authority, you have that regulatory authority, you have that. So not the drivers that that Senator Gallian's concerned about, but the big polluters. And is there a plan or some contemplation of having them be a part of the solution in a more transparent way?
As I said earlier, I think that needs to be something we need to think about. Right now, we are making the polluters called the power plants pay. So that's who we are really making pay right now. But yeah, there's a lot of polluters in Maryland, in the world. And yes, we need to make sure that we think about those things as we go forward and, think about how we're cleaning up Maryland. You mentioned Justice 40. We are definitely making sure with all the funding that we have at MDE from the state revolving funds and all the money that we get from the US EPA and the federal government, we are giving out more than 40% actually. So 40 is the floor, but we're giving out much more than that. So we take that very seriously. You're welcome. Thank
Okay,
you.
Senator Simon Air.
Cleanup.
I might have a question.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. You have a very nice way of presenting. It sounded rosy.
It is rosy.
Yeah. Well, yes, and in some, I have 7 kids, and they bring things to me, and they sound rosy until I have to pay for it.
Yes, I understand.
So in the presentation, we also had a briefing last week, and I try to come at it from a balanced standpoint. And they were coming in saying, we know we're going this direction and we need to and all that. But the concern from some was the pace at which we were doing it.
Mhm.
And so my concern is at the pace we're going at it, what is the impact on the ratepayer? Because in my district and surrounding, which serve BGE services, we just had a 3-year approval of pretty high increases, gas and electric. And on top of that, you talked about the coal plants. They're in my district. Both of them are shutting down. I think they're the last 2. That's going to require over a $700 million investment for transmission lines to get nuclear energy down to our area. That's going to be put on the ratepayer. And then they're negotiating also to have them stay open longer, and that's going to be higher rates, and that's going to be put onto our ratepayer. So there's this constant pressure on the ratepayer. And then I hear $1 billion a year funding for this. And I was glad to hear it's not going to be on the taxpayer money. But it was interesting, you said that the governor put $90 million in for this year, which I'm assuming is taxpayer money from the general funds. But my question is.
No, it's not actually, but go on.
Okay, where is it coming from?
It's from the Reggie money that I mentioned earlier, the money that we're getting from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
Okay,
Okay.
well, that's good clarification. So my question is, where are we getting $1 billion for that? And what impact is that going to have on our ratepayers? As far as, first you have the presentation was, we'll install the electric, it'll be cheaper for the customer. But you also have to factor in the infrastructure costs that's going to be borne by the ratepayer to get this. And also, and some of this you can get back to me, you don't have to answer it all.
Okay.
But you have the gas infrastructure that's currently there that we have billions of dollars of indebtedness to. If we get rid of that, I'm assuming they're going to want their money for that, and that'll be passed on to the ratepayer again on top of that. And you just have all these costs. Has there been any analysis with your plans of the $1 billion and so forth, how much it's going to cost the ratepayers, going forward? Eventually we'll get some cost savings, but how is this going to affect the ratepayer along the trajectory that you're proposing in this plan?
Yeah, when we think about the transition, well, first of all the things that you mentioned, we have these conversations with the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, and we did talk about the gas infrastructure that's already a part of the scenario, and there's money invested in that already. And now we have this transition into the green economy and the green electricity. So the $1 billion that you ask about as part of that plan is to make sure that ratepayers are taken care of. So if we could, where we're going to get the money from is a different issue. I don't know that yet. We're going to work together, I hope, and figure out a way to bring in $1 billion without impacting the taxpayer. But let's just say we're successful in doing that. A lot of the money will go to homeowners so that we can help offset any rate increases that may happen initially. But eventually, that one-time rate increase that will happen as we are transitioning, if we have money and we can give them a rebate to help offset that, let's say the first year, the years after that, it's going to wipe itself out because they're going to be saving about $2,700 per month when you go all electric, when you look at heat pumps. So there is a cost in the front of it, but we want to be able to help consumers offset that cost.
Saving a month?
About 2,700. A year. I said a month.
Okay.
That would be great. I'm gonna get one now. Wow,
Okay. So
I'm
the
sorry
big
about that.
question, the huge question is where are you getting the money? So you've got this, the department has this plan, and just the little detail that we don't know is where the money's coming from. So when do you expect to know that?
Right. So the plan, we were required in the Climate Solutions Now Act to have a plan. What will it take to meet the goals? So that plan is saying this is what it will take to meet the goals.
I think I'm understanding better. So this is more a policy statement saying to reach these goals, this is the policy that you would have to put in place, and somebody else will, whether it's with your collaboration or what, but somebody else will figure out where the money's coming from.
Yeah, when you read the Climate Solutions Now Act, yes, it directs us to model, map it out, look at the economy, make sure there's not a lot of pressure on the economy and on businesses, and tell us what is it that we need to do in Maryland to meet the goals that are set forth, which is the 60% by 2031 and net zero by 2045. How can we do that? That's what the plan says. The next, what you're talking about is we've also included in there, if we were to do all of this, it's going to cost XYZ. That's where we are today. That's why we all need to work together, figure out a funding mechanism so that we can reach the goals it's in law now, so that we can do what we need to do in Maryland to get us where we need to be with meeting the goals.
And that helps me understand where we're coming from.
Okay.
We just took energy on in this committee last year, so it's a new subject for me. The other thing is there's been comments about the cost of not doing something, and I get that. But even in our debates on the climate now, it was realized that you're not going to stop severe storms solely by implementing this in Maryland. It's going to take a nation, it's going to take a world effort to do that. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't go ahead and do it, but just the premise that if we put these changes in places, we're not going to have all these floods and we're not going to have all this weather, I think is a false statement that we're not that big in the world to make that much of an impact, but we should do what we can to help our little piece of the puzzle. Would you agree with that?
I agree that we don't have a choice not to do anything. That's what I agree on. We have to move forward. There's too much happening around us with climate change, floods, and everything else that you see, weather issues. We can't just stand still. Even though Maryland, it's a little piece of the puzzle, we have to lay the first brick to build the home. We have to. So we're trying to set the foundation. We're trying to protect Maryland. Other states, they have to do their part as well, which is why we have the COP28. I don't know if you heard about COP28, but that's where all the countries and worlds come together and talk about what can we all do in the sub cabinets, which is us, Maryland. What can we do to make a difference in the world? So Maryland, we don't have any space to do nothing. If we do, then what you'll see in Maryland in the future will not be bright for your family, for my family. We have to move. We have to stop and reverse in Maryland the pollution that we have that's continuing to warm the earth, the world.
That we have to do something. But I don't want to give the expectation to Marylanders that, we're not just laying the brick, they're going to expect to see a house there. And it's just, we're a small piece of the puzzle and we have our personal responsibility as a state, but we're not, even if we implement everything you said here, it's not going to change the world. It'll just be one part of the puzzle that hopefully others will join in and actually start making a difference.
That's a good point. Yes, it will change Maryland. You'll be able to walk outside and breathe better in Maryland. Yeah, but if you go to Pennsylvania, I don't know. So we're trying to protect Marylanders here. We're I think Senator Washington mentioned about the health issues in hospitals. So what we're trying to do is reduce that. We're trying to protect Marylanders as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I do just one or two quick ones. I want to go back to the EV conversation we started. First of all, advanced cars that was done by regulation as opposed to the first time when we adopted originally, it was done with a legislative vote. So there's a little bit of a different dynamic in kind of analyzing this a little bit. But there have been questions raised about our surrounding states. I think Senator Carrozza have not necessarily adopted advanced cars 2 model. And, the marketplace is potentially a little bit tricky between now and 2027 when some of these numbers kick in. So I just want to be clear about just 2 quick things because I had to send a letter to the Attorney General about this. So by adopting Advanced Clean Cars 2, we have not a lot of flexibility, but the one thing that you did say, Chris, just so there's no ambiguity about it, is you do have the discretion when it comes to enforcement. And so is there any open-mindedness or discussions about the issue of enforcement? Because we are talking something like, what is it, $21,000, $25,000 per car as a penalty for being out of compliance in 2027 or thereabouts. Is that a conversation that's ongoing? Because I bring that up because there is some bills being drafted legislatively to actually do some things in terms of delaying enforcement. And I don't know where the department is on the regulatory front, which this could be done by regulation. So have you had conversations with the dealers about some of the complexities that are starting to emerge?
Sure, yeah, we have and we will continue to have those conversations. A couple of things to note is that Virginia, Delaware, and DC have all adopted the standard. So 3 of our neighbors have adopted the standards.
Can you
as
just
well.
clarify? Because I'm getting mixed information about that. Now, I understand that for Virginia to actually have it in place, Governor Youngkin needs to take some proactive action, which he is not doing. I mean, I just want to, let's get to in Delaware similarly. Right now, is Delaware fully in advance? Have they fully adopted and that's being implemented?
Yes, so Delaware and DC both adopted last year along with us. So their programs will come into effect in model year 2027, just like ours. They completed their regulatory processes. Virginia has a state law that automatically adopted, and there is some disagreement between the two, the executive and legislative branches on that. Delaware and DC, both regulatory. Virginia, sure, there may be a little bit of ambiguity there.
Because when I talk about the marketplace, I've been hearing a lot about they're going to have this, you know, it's going to be a boondoggle for Tyson's Corner because they're not really in because Youngkin governor is not buying in. And therefore, because of some of the things that Senator Gallion had raised, I only bring this up just on the enforcement. We're not going back on, you know, we adopted, we're not moving back word on this front, but the enforcement angle, you know, these are really stiff penalties. And so we'll continue the dialogue offline, but there is going to be likely a bill in the committee to that effect as well. So
if I may, just to
Sure.
confirm a couple of points, I believe it's California has penalties up to, I believe, $20,000 per vehicle. We don't adopt that. We have enforcement discretion. We've been doing clean cars since model year 2011 with the electric vehicle requirements, and we have never had to assess a financial penalty on a manufacturer. No other clean car state has ever had to assess a financial penalty on a manufacturer for EV shortfalls in all of the years and in all of the states that we've been implementing this program. And I'd be happy to follow up with more detail about the enforcement flexibilities. It's quite generous. Manufacturers have 3 years to make up any shortfall after the shortfall occurs. They have lots of different mechanisms they can use to address shortfalls before it would be an enforcement conversation.
okay, well, that's helpful too. Any further or final questions for the secretary or her team before we move on to bill hearings? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Madam Secretary,
Thank you.
for coming in today. It was very informative. We have to take a 5-minute break to reboot the computers here before we
Okay.
can start streaming the bill hearings, but thank you.
Thank
for
you.
coming